Hi, this is the show that answers the questions that expats, nomads, and full-time travelers living across the globe ask themselves every day. These insights and secrets are shared when we interview experts and authors from across the globe. Hello, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries, our dear listeners. Today, it is my incredible privilege to introduce you to Rhoda Bangerter. Thank you so much for being here with us. And we're very excited and looking forward to this interview.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We are thrilled to have you. Let me tell you a little bit about Rhoda. So she was raised in a multicultural home. She's married to a Swiss fellow, and they currently live in a city called Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. Now, I want to just make a note here that Bishkek used to be called Pishkek and Frunze. Did you know that, Rhoda?
Yeah, the airport is still called Frunze. It's FRU are the initials of the airport because of the history of the town.
Fascinating. So her husband has traveled for work their entire marriage, and including a couple of years when he was based in Kabul in Afghanistan. So she has realized that there's a lot of us around the world, mums and dads, who experience exactly the same challenges with few resources to guide them. And so she wrote this amazing book to share her learnings and her extensive research. It's called Holding the Fort Abroad. And she developed her services to support solo parents in long-distance relationship with partners who travel. So she's going to speak to us today. She's been a speaker with Families in Global Transition, Coffee with Expat Women, She has been speaking and doing the circuit, and she runs workshops for organizations who actually support families of staff and non-family postings, such as the World Bank Group Family Network and the World Food Program. So I think we have a lot to talk about today, Rhoda.
Yes, thank you for having me, as I said before. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with you and see where it goes.
So I have known you for a few years, and I sort of got wind of this a number of years ago, but I didn't really realize it until you mentioned the other day that you were actually part of a refugee family. Could you please tell our audience a little bit about what that felt like, what that looked like, and where you were a refugee from?
Yes. And all this is what you don't get in a bio, right?
Exactly. I want to hear the other side of the bio.
Yeah, there's a few things there that are not in the bio. Yeah, my mother's Middle Eastern and my dad's British. They met in Lebanon and they got married, and I was born in Beirut in 1975.
Oh.
Just at the beginning of the civil war that lasted, I think, 17 years. And so it always kind of pinches my heart a little bit to think of, I was their second child. So my brother was 3 at the time. To think of this baby born in a wartime. I was born during the pause in the bombings. And my mom says, how my brother would hide under the table, and she must have been incredibly stressed. And I was born late. So I actually have like a physical disability from it. That's very small compared to what it could have been, but it was harrowing for them. And so years later, I was talking to a couple and they said, oh, in May, 75, oh yeah, we were on a cruise on the exact date where I was born. And I thought, isn't that life, right? In some parts of the world, there's strife and war, and there's babies being born into that. And then in other parts, there are people who are living in total safety. And so I always kind of keep that in mind. And so it's part of my journey and who I think about. And now I'm thinking, now I'm living in a country in safety all these years later. So it does also give me hope. But It's part of my history. They were able to leave Lebanon because my dad was British, had the British passport. And so they were able to leave. And that is also part of my, of what's in my mind, of thinking, well, a lot of people were not able to leave, maybe difficult circumstances. So yeah, it's not something I forget. It's definitely part of my identity.
Well, I think I had gotten a sort of a whiff of it in the past from knowing you for about 6 or 7 years, but I'd never heard your story. So this is Nomadic Diaries. You heard her story here on Nomadic Diaries. And that is really fascinating, especially.
And can I add, they did not leave on a plane. They left in a car. They put their they gave all their possessions away, got in a car with 2 little children, did 10 days to drive around to end up in France. And they were in long queues, long lines. We grew up listening to these stories of just trying to find a place where they could put down roots again and say, let's create home here together. And so, and you know, they have stories of all their stuff, you know, the back of the car opening, all their stuff going out, and they were all trailing down the road with people picking up their stuff. And so, yeah, it's part of my family history.
And it's very visceral when you share it like that with people so that we can imagine it, use our imaginations and live into your story. And I think that this is a story that many of us need to pay attention to because the rate of refugeeism around the world is exponential right now. We have refugees who come from all over the world to South America, and then they walk through Mexico to the US border. And there seems to be a fantasy that most of these people are Mexican, but actually only like 10 or 20% of them are Mexican because they're coming from all over the world, Rhoda. And as we see what's happening in Gaza and the number of people who are going to have to find homes, I can only imagine how happy your parents are now to see you thriving and giving back to communities and writing and having such a meaningful purpose.
Thank you. Thank you. It is interesting. I think it also says that where we are now isn't where we were.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that we stay where we are. And it also means that when you see somebody, you don't know what's in their past. You don't know what they've lived through. You don't know what their family history is.
Yes.
So it's always good to keep that in mind.
It is good to keep that in mind. And it's good to keep that in heart as well. And I think that this is part of our challenge in living in modern day society is connecting. It's okay to have all the statistics and the information and the science that we now have, but it's connecting it to the heart so that we are fully human and so that we are able to support each other as fully human beings. So we were going to talk a little bit about your beginning history of being a first-time expat overseas. So I would love to know things like, what age were you when you went overseas in your first expat experience from the UK? I also expated from the UK. And a little bit about what that was like and what was hard and what was easy about it.
Well, what happened after my parents left Lebanon was that they settled in the south of France. And what people might not know as well is that I'm a missionary kid.
Oh, okay.
And so I grew up in the south of France. Okay, it sounds great, but
not necessarily.
we were not on the Riviera. But I grew up there and I did all my schooling there. France was our terre d'accueil, as we say, our host country.
Yes.
And we grew up there, and until I was at university, I did my university there. Wow. So I was 21 when I went to Scotland because I wanted to go live in Scotland.
And what better place would you be wanting to live in? Exactly what part of Scotland did you go to?
I went to Stirling to do Erasmus.
Oh, yes, I have. My dad was born in Stirling, and I have ancestors from Stirling. In fact, most of them are buried at the bottom of the castle.
Well, what I can say is that they definitely know how to party.
Yes.
So I had a lot of fun there. I did my last year of university at Stirling for the Erasmus program, then wanted to sort of go a bit further south to be closer to France and my parents. It's so funny because somebody wrote in one of my first job applications, my reference said, very attached to her parents. I'm like, well, yeah, when, you go to another country and your only reference is your parents, you want to kind of be closer to them. Anyway, so then I went to England, to the south of England, settled there for about 10 years until I met my husband by email. I was working for an organization called International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, which is a Christian charity.
Yes.
And he'd worked for them ages ago. And I'm telling you the long version because it's fun. And somebody said, oh, you should write to him for this project you're working on. So I said, hi, I'm Rhoda. da, 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 da. Can you help? Can you volunteer? And he said, oh, I'm in Congo right now. I don't have time. I'm so sorry. But we just hit it off, chatted. But so we long distanced for a while. And then he said to me, oh, I'll be on the field for ages, because he was working for the International Red Cross at the time. And he said, it's very hard to get a job in Geneva. But within a few months, within a year of us dating, he proposed and he got a job in Geneva.
Oh.
And we thought we'd be in
fellow.
Geneva. Okay, so within a year, no, so we got married. I think we'd been in the same place like maybe total 2 months. We'd literally dated long distance and then moved to Switzerland. Within a month, we were married. I left my job. I was looking for a new job in Geneva. And this is where I think I struggled. I thought, I'm multicultural. I've traveled. I can do this. No problem. What I found out was that you're getting married. You're in a new relationship. You're getting married. You're changing countries. You're trying to find a new job, which all your qualifications and experience may not add up to what you're looking for. Like literally that first year, I think I was meeting all his friends. Literally every weekend, it was a new face or new faces. And it got to me. It really got to me. And then we had a baby and he was traveling. He was traveling to Darfur. He was traveling to really places at war, because by then he was the world expert on armed groups, so rebel groups.
Wow.
So he
like militia,
yeah,
different kinds of militias, like
yes.
there are spread around like the Houthis and people like that. Yes.
And he likes to remind people that not all rebels are the bad guys, because they might be actually rebelling against a government that is not. But it was tough. And so I say in the book that we just had I think a 3 months old, and he was in Darfur at the time. I was crying all the time. And I went to see a doctor that I just signed up. I found a doctor near us who was taking new patients, signed up, went there, and he starts listening to me tell my story. And he's like, don't you think that's a lot for one person? And I'm like, oh, wait, that is a lot for one person.
Yes. Imagine that.
When I started listing, I just moved countries. I just got married. I just had a baby. We just moved house. I went back to work when I just finished breastfeeding. It was literally squeezed into a very short period of time, all these changes and transitions. And transitions where my brain just hadn't, and my soul just hadn't caught up.
Yes.
And actually, I got very sick, and I discovered I had a degenerative eye condition, which I believe was probably initiated from the stress I was under of just trying to adapt to too much, too fast.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people have that. I don't think it's uncommon. I think often when you move countries, I think for a lot of people, you accumulate a lot of different changes.
I really can feel for you, because when I returned I was a junior diplomat in the British Foreign Service. And when I returned from Cameroon, West Africa, to a house that I had shared with my first love, basically, that got sold, and he moved on to a different relationship. I didn't have friends. And then I realized the Foreign and Commonwealth Office was just not a place for someone ambitious like myself. And I didn't belong. And so I can remember the overwhelm of all the pieces of that transition when I went back to London. And I have to say that my soul had not caught up. That's such a wonderful expression. And I ended up what I call bouncing to the next place, which was actually a step in the right direction, but not necessarily healing.
So you just kept adding to it, seeing as you weren't catching up, you might as well just add.
Yes, I just leapfrog.
Yeah, it's something that I really try and point out to people, or if I have a client or in my writings, to just help people see the layers.
Yes.
Because real life continues, and you may have an illness, you may be caring for someone, you may be changing jobs, and you move country, and your partner's traveling, which is something that I discovered is super common.
Very. And yes, and you're dealing with a new language, possibly.
Yes.
And you're dealing with trying to find where you belong. And sometimes my experience has been that many of us fail to belong to ourselves. We're looking for belonging outside of ourselves. And it
Yes.
starts within, not outside.
Yes, and that's where the traditional transition model really bugs me because
Tell
it's
me about
like,
that.
oh, you've got to say goodbye to what was past,
Oh
and then you
yeah.
got to, where are you at?
Build
And
a
then
bridge.
you're in your new one, and I see how that can work. But when you have like, so I call it complex transition.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
same as you have complex PTSD, where PTSD is a
Yeah.
traumatic event, but complex PTSD is long-term, repeated, traumatic events on the long term. Transition for me is this never-ending transitions. You're constantly going from one to the other. Many different things are changing. Now, some people have said to me, well, that's all part of one transition. Well, I'm not sure because I could be grieving my previous job while I'm super excited about my new relationship,
Exactly.
while I'm super scared about having my first baby, and I'm exhausted from the move. So it's confusing. So I would say my first one is like, whoa, just realize I practically say to people, like, make a list of every single change you've had in the last 12 months and just realize that it's huge, and then give yourself the grace, because if you want your soul to catch up, where are you going to find that space?
Exactly.
There's no time for it.
Exactly. The most recent title of my book on repatriation, which has been, as you know, through so many iterations, is now a sequel, and it's Moving Home with Ease and Grace. So you are so right, because sometimes we forget how that we can call in ease, we can step back. We do have the choice to participate in how we are creating this new life and how we're building it, and exactly what is the most important thing to tackle. But when I was 20 something, moving between London and Cameroon and London and Dubai and then the US. I got to the US, and then I really had my body and my life made me sit up and pay attention. And it was in the US and the South that I started to delve into self-development and personal empowerment. So what step did you take that all these layers?
Well, as I said, for about, I can't remember now because it was over 15 years ago, but my vision deteriorated to the point where I was home for about, I reckon, about a year and a half in the dark because I couldn't go outside
Oh
because the light
no.
would bother me so much. And see, I don't share this a lot, but it's again something where when you look at someone, you don't know what they've lived or even what they're dealing with because it's a hidden disability.
Yes, yes.
But then I got a transplant. The day the hospital called, I just cried because I knew somebody had passed away. And I cried because I'm gonna cry now because it's an incredible gift. It is.
Yes.
And that it's so I had it on one eye, a corneal transplant, and I knew that as I had a by that time I think our eldest was maybe a year old. And so it was hard being with a toddler indoors with a traveling husband. And I must say, people from the church helped a lot, and a few neighbors. But I remember a time when my mother-in-law was going to come, and literally I could not see maybe my hand in front of my nose, but I was on the floor, scrubbing the floor. I had a transplant, and then and it completely transformed my life. I was able to see again and go out again. But by that time we were moving. My husband got a job with Foreign Service and moved to the capital, which was not that far away, but he would go on Monday mornings and come back on Friday evenings.
Yes.
While I had two babies by that time, and two under fives, and selling the house. So for a year we did that. He would come back on Friday night and go back, come back, yeah, then leave on Monday morning. And I remember like cleaning the house up and putting like all the mops and everything in the car, taking the two boys because there was going to be a visit for the apartment we were selling. And I was trying to find the entrance to this zoo. And I was going back and forth, trying to find the entrance. And I get stopped by the police. And the police says, can I have your paper? He said, you're acting strange. I'm like, yeah, I'm selling my apartment. And, blah, 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 blah. And he says, can I have your paperwork? And so I'm like, here's my driver's license, which is French. And here's my ID, which is Swiss. And and I think I had another paper that was British. And he looks at it and he goes, can you please make it like it's only one country?
Oh, wow.
Because he got pretty annoyed at me that I had paperwork from 3 different countries. Anyway, we sold that house, moved to Bern. So then at that point, I was like, I need to stop working because if I'm going to be the one that's on call every time something happens, I just can't do. I knew that I couldn't physically do kids and him being always, how to put it? I couldn't call him and he would come.
He wasn't available at the drop of a hat. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we moved to the US. So we thought, when we got married, we thought we'd be in Geneva for a year. We ended up being 7 years. Then we moved to Bern. We thought, oh, we'll be there, forever. We were there 18 months. I moved to the US. We were in the US for 2 years. I wasn't working. And then in the US, I kind of had an epiphany moment.
As the US tends to do, it tends to shine a light on the aspirational side of life, right?
And I went outside, bought a bunch of strawberries, came back home, put 3 bowls on the table, one for my husband, one each for my sons. And I start counting these beautiful strawberries, like making sure every bowl had the same amount of strawberries. So our sons, right? One for our eldest, one for our youngest, and one for my husband. And then I'm like, wait a minute, where's my bowl? No strawberries for Rhoda. And I wasn't even eating them like from that. I was like literally trying to make sure they all had a great serving. And I was like, oh my word, that has got to change.
Yes.
And from that moment on, I started not even putting myself first, but just even including myself. And I think that's a big lesson I've learned. It's like any decision making, it's feasible to include yourself. Sometimes we think like, oh, it's going to make it complicated or anything. No, it'll make it more complicated if you don't. And it was a huge turnaround for me. So when we came back to Switzerland, I was like, okay, I need to build something for myself for 20 years time. Yes. Even if it takes 20 years or however long the children as soon as they leave home, what have I built? Yes. Even if it's one brick at a time, because by then I'll have built like a whole building.
Exactly.
And actually, I must say it went faster than I thought. As soon as I started doing that, I said, I'll just baby steps, right? Baby steps. And I got a coach. I knew what values I wanted. So I found the person that who had those values, life-changing, being coached, and then trained as a coach myself. And that took me on the trajectory I'm on now. And it completely changed my life. And it was so worth it.
That's amazing, isn't it? How we find ourselves as expat women, wives, sometimes followers, sometimes leaders, sometimes we're invisible, but eventually, when we fully show up in our power and our presence, the quantitative events that happen in response to that, I think, are absolutely magical and cannot be quantified. And it's almost like it's inexplicable to me to watch this process.
And it's one that you can't necessarily foresee.
Yes.
I'm going to invent a new life for myself. Yeah. So I think for skills, I think especially for expats, rather than say, where do I want to be in 5 years' time? It's like, what skills do I want to have? What do I want to develop as a person? Who do I want to be in 5 years? Because you can do that location anywhere.
Exactly. What are my movable assets?
Yes.
Because we all have incredible assets, and it's how are we going to build those assets?
Exactly. I feel like saying genau because I love that word. But what I meant was, there is also the other aspect where I could never have guessed that this was the topic and that was going to grab my heart in service of other people living it, and that this was the life I was going to live, and being a podcast host and writing a book and talking and being a speaker. I would never have guessed that.
no.
So I think there's those two things where you're creating as well as you go along
Sure.
from your life experience and your passions and what you love.
And, like, I think that's a natural consequence. There are consequences for everything we do. There's consequences for leaving, there's consequences for moving. But I think the natural consequence of actually taking yourself in hand and paying attention to the invisible side of life, because a lot of our conscious mind is tied up in processing the moves and the logistics and the language and the physical, right? And I think it's actually spending more time on what I call the invisible side of life, which is our mindsets, our attitudes, even our skills are invisible. And
Yeah.
so if we can pay more attention to the skills, the attitudes, and the mindset, then I think that we do better. I have never seen anyone not thrive in that situation.
Once they know those, or once they're
Once
attending to them.
once their awareness is increased. I have a client, a coaching client, had very, very young man, very, very simple means. And, it's been absolute miraculous to see how now he came from very, very little. Now he's in the space station industry. And talking to Elon Musk every day, and just, in 10 short years. And so
Yeah.
I think that we're limited by our paradigms, by what we believe, by our self-beliefs, and by our lack of imagination.
And our lack of awareness, I think, well, for me, knowing my values, and this is something we've done as a family as well, as knowing what each person values. I found that helpful as a multicultural person, because there are so many, again, speaking of layers, there's so many different elements. But saying, no, I value adventure and generosity and achievement, which may seem a funny combination, but and then my husband values other things, and my children each value other things, and that to me was also helpful for my awareness of my identity, and also going forward, choosing things. That has helped. What I did want to cover as well is, like, now, well, we've been together 18, 19 years. There are still things I find hard in expatriation.
And that was the next question. My next question was, having been through all this journey and considering your circumstances at birth and moving on to a young person, and then living this big international life with a person, obviously I've never met your husband, but it sounds like he's very driven and very purposeful and very visionary, just by the way you talk about him. So where does that bring you now? And what would you say to someone who is looking forward to being in that sort of situation as you are now, fully, more aware and with more enlightenment around your values, your desires, and where you're going with this?
That's a difficult question, because I tend to not kind of, you know what? This is a question I ask people as well. And then now that you're asking me, I'm thinking, I don't know, it depends on the person.
But what
I
for
think
you, what strikes you in your heart?
when I launched out on this life, I was looking at the here and now, at the next move. And one of the things I didn't anticipate was 20 years down the line of living this life, you're far from aging parents. Your children don't know which country to live in. And there's that parent guilt. And we are careful to put in the positive childhood experiences that Tanya Crossman mentions, and
Yes.
making sure our kids have the space to speak and have choices when we move, and telling them in advance and everything. But I still find that hard to think, what would it have been like if we'd stayed in the same place? And that's pops up from time to time. And then I have to speak to myself and say, hey, you chose this, you love this life.
Yes.
We're doing great. We're putting things in place. You don't know what would have been in the alternate life, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So it would have also brought surprises, things you didn't expect, hardships. So I talk to myself when that comes up, but it still does. because I don't know if it ever goes away. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe people do live like, oh, this is fine, this is great, whatever. But I think things do crop up as you live life that are hard. And when you're expat, it makes you question your choices. But it's okay, because there would have been hard things if we'd stayed in the same place as well. And then the other thing, obviously, the including yourself. It's just, for me, it was such a huge part. And for me, it's not like, oh, I'm going to include myself, therefore we have to change our whole life. It's, I'll include myself, therefore going forward when there are choices to be made, or even how we're living now, it has to work for me too. Otherwise, it's just not gonna, even if it means creatively thinking about how it could work, because it might not be exactly how I imagined it would be, but it's still working for me. But saying, oh, no, okay, I'm going to follow and, it's fine, because he is very strong. He knows what he wants. He's very talented. He has a huge capacity. Now I'm like, oh, okay, so what am I going to create for myself? And the fact that I have my own life has helped us hugely. The fact that I have my own interests, my passions.
Your purpose.
Yes, because, hey, he's still gone a lot. Now we live under the same roof, but he's head of mission. So he's the Swiss ambassador to Kyrgyzstan, which has been a completely change of role for me. It took me a good year to find my feet. So 18 years of being together, maybe I would say 30 years of living an expat life. And even before that, not even living in my parents' country, I'm still getting used to a change of role. He's changed his role. I always joke and say, like, I used to be married to a humanitarian, now I'm married to a diplomat. Same person, just,
Well, we all
different
change hats. Yes.
different roles.
Right.
And so it took me a long time to figure out what my place is. I still sometimes get upset when I'm asked to step aside, because he's the one who's the ambassador. I'm not. But then I have huge opportunities to be invited to sit at a table and join in a conversation or in representation of Switzerland, which is huge privilege. But there you go. There's still new things to learn, new ways to adapt, and I'm still might be getting upset at something because it's not exactly how I envisioned it.
Yeah. The journey is the journey, isn't it? I don't think that we have the capability of projecting exactly how it's going to turn out. We can state our preferences and move in the right direction with actions, but adaptability has its own organic means of performing.
Yes. Say that again. Adaptability.
Adaptability has its own organic, it's very organic, and it has its own means where its own stage where it just has to show up and perform. It just has to work. I mean, you cannot script life, cannot do any of that thing. There was a quote I had looked up not too long ago. Let me see. Adaptability is not imitation. It means power of resistance and assimilation. And Mahatma Gandhi said that. And what I read into that is that adaptability cannot be practiced. It cannot be legislated. It can't be frameworked. We can't put it in our frameworks, Rhoda. We just have to go with, because it's nature and it's curiosity, and it's what I call the improv, because I
Yes.
think that we all are improving every single day and we need to get used to it. And it can be messy and ugly and wrong. And I
You
think,
were asking me earlier what I did that helped. And I think in this context, to be that adaptable, I think understanding my emotions was
yes,
huge.
yes,
Expressing my needs in a non-highly emotional or aggressive way. That
yes.
might sound weird, but to
No,
actually be able to, I can feel my emotions as much as I want. And I can express them where the other people around me can hear me has helped me a lot. And to say,
yeah,
you know what? I am saying that I need this, and that. And it doesn't need to be attached to an emotion. It's a need. That's it. Full stop. I feel like saying, when people say no is a full sentence, well, I
yeah,
need this. That's a full sentence as well. It's a
yeah.
complete sentence.
And sometimes when I'm working with clients, I remind them that they deserve. It's not just what they need, it's they deserve. to have everything in place to make them feel like they're whole, complete, and functioning wherever they are and whatever the circumstances. It's really,
I struggle
really,
with that one. Oof,
yeah.
the deserve one, I struggle. Maybe it's just from how I grew up, but understanding that it's not because I'm broken that I need it. It's because
No,
that's what I need to function. And it's
yes,
like a car needs certain things. Well, I need certain things, and I'm going to be different than, say, my husband who needs other things. And I still struggle with that when he needs less. And I
yes,
feel like I need more of, rest or
yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that that's a feminine, I think that's a male-female cultural experience in there.
where we need more rest. One of the other things I would say, which I keep repeating all the time, is that with this kind of lifestyle, a yoga session 3 times a year is not going to cut it.
A week, baby.
Even whatever a non-expat person does for self-care, we need
Yeah.
to do much more, and yet we have potentially less time. So
Mm,
a lot of
mm,
my thinking is, what can I do and what can people do for self-care that's going to be effective? And this is where Kirsten Pontius, do you know her? I interviewed her on how do you do self-care when life's crazy? Because
right.
really that's where it comes down to it.
Exactly.
When life is great and there's no transitions, I mean, I can do self-care, which is saying a
Mm,
lot because I
hmm.
really have to put effort into it. It's when I don't have time, when life's crazy, when I want
Right.
to do other things, when there's 20 things going on. How do I do self-care? And I've learned to ground myself much more and more often and do things, just multiply it, because it just doesn't
Yes.
cut it with this kind of lifestyle.
No. And I do see a lot of digital nomads, a lot of different kinds of nomads who are listeners here. And for our listeners, I would just like to draw your attention to the fact that here we have a coach and someone who's juggled multiple countries, who is still, Rhoda, it sounds like you are still on that journey of finding the self-care. And I am almost in my, about to change into another decade. And I notice when it slips, I notice quicker than I used to.
Mm,
I
mm,
notice, oh, I'm going down the slippery slope. Oh, got to catch up. And this is happening
hmm.
faster. And I think that that's all we can hope for. I really get quite bored with all the, well, you got to do the self-care. Yes, yes, you're right. I
Yes,
do. And
yes,
but
yes.
I now have that voice installed in me that catches
Hmm.
myself when
Yeah,
I'm about to do something that I know would be folly for my soul.
yeah. Ah,
Well, in
self-care.
conclusion, I think that we've covered managing overseas challenges. We've talked about the management of split locations lifestyles, what's involved in being an ambassador's wife, just a little bit, and some of the challenges of that situation. We've talked about acknowledging the impact of transitions, and we've talked about a few strategies for accompanying spouses. I love some of your concepts of my soul had not caught up and helping people see into the layers, actually appreciating the hard-won wisdom. So you've covered a lot today, and I would just make sure that we make sure that our audience and our listeners are caught up with that. I will put all of those takeaways in the show notes, Rhoda. Do you have one last inspirational thought for our listeners before we break off the super connection that we have exactly 12 hours apart across the
Yes.
globe? So it's so late at night for you. It's now almost 10:30 and it's 10:30 in the morning for me in Mexico. And yet here we have two souls who have made this connection online with the similar or some commonalities in our backgrounds and our experiences of life. So I, for one, am
Mhm.
very, very grateful. So what would you like to leave the audience with today?
Well, as you were recapping some of our conversation, what also came to mind is the idea of carrying boxes. And whenever I struggle to ask for help, I always remind myself that I'm carrying more than a few boxes. And just because I can carry each box individually doesn't mean that I'm supposed to be carrying, 15 boxes. I would never ask myself to carry 15 boxes. So that's something that helps me to remember, is there a box I need to put down? Is there a box I need to let someone else do? Is one of the box someone's expectations? Is one of the box someone else's responsibility? Or can I get help with one of my boxes? And that usually helps me to then realize all these layers, especially in a move, because you're adding boxes and boxes are leaving, and things are moving around, and you're like, whoa, you don't want to topple.
And I would also add to that I think age played, I discovered in my last major international move, age and maturity plays a huge role in that. And I went into it going, oh, I've done this before. This is my 9th country. I can do this. And yet it took my body months to recover. So I think sometimes we don't consider our stage of life as one of those boxes, because each stage of life can only contain so much, right?
That's very true.
So I wish you the best of success in Bish Kent, otherwise known as Pishpeck. I love that word, Pishpeck. And I'm really grateful for this heartfelt and inspiring conversation just between the two of us today. And I'm really grateful that you have led the way with your Holding the Fort Abroad book. And please, can you help our audience find you? Where would you like us to look for you?
Well, my handle on Instagram is A Multicultural Life, or you can also type it on the website, amulticulturallife.com. I'm actually working on a resource center that people will be able to access to all my resources and strategies on how you maintain family life when one of you is gone a lot.
Yeah,
which is, as I said, very frequent for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize that they're coping with that too. And it's a very specific lifestyle as well.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you for this. And we will put all of those links definitely in the show notes. We really appreciate your time, your energy, and the attention that you are giving these subjects in order that we can all benefit and live more effective and efficient lifestyles. Thank you, Rhoda.
Thank you very much, Doreen.
So listeners, please like, share, and review, and we'll see you on the next episode. So it's sayonara, masalama, and hasta luego.